Nobody outkicks the coverage like Bill Snyder when it comes to recruiting versus on-field performance. And Kansas State fans will be expecting the same to hold true going forward from 2016. We bring on Ty Berger from Bringing on the Cats to discuss Kansas State's latest haul. Ty, we always appreciate the time and you coming in to break things down, because we probably need your insight as a blogger more than anybody else I've had on here, because there was actually absolutely no attention given to Kansas State on National Signing Day. It's a recruiting class that's ranked 79th by Rivals, 73rd by 24/7. It's a typical Bill Snyder recruiting class. Your thoughts about the overall class that stands at about 22 commits?
It was a little bit of a disappointment for a lot of our fans. There were there were 3 players that we were in on, had verbal commitments from at some point that were flipped later in the process by other programs. We lost Trey Bryant to Nebraska. He's a running back out of St. Louis who played on the Missouri 6A runner-ups this year. Kid out of Wichita, Xavier Kelly, a defensive end who Brent Venables came into Wichita and took away from us to Clemson. And Zach Shackelford, a lineman from Texas who we had committed, looked like he was going to be an early enrollee, and then took an official visit to Texas late in the game, and they flipped him, and he's already on campus there. So those were 3 guys that would have been big pieces of the class that we lost at some point. So that was a disappointment to lose those guys. Those would have been three of the higher rated players in the class, and those are all impact positions. You know, you need a lineman like Shackelford who's just a savage on the field. You know, running back's always a position where you can't have too many solid players. And then, of course, in the Big 12, having somebody like Xavier Kelly who can get off the edge and rush the passer is a huge thing. So losing those guys was a disappointment. And looking at the class as a whole, I think it is in a lot of ways a typical Bill Snyder class. It focuses on player development rather than star power. It's not heavy on JUCOs, but it plugs some needs on the roster in various areas there. So it's a little bit disappointing from an overall ratings perspective, but from the individual pieces, you look at it and think, you know, it probably isn't going to be a disaster for K-State.
And Ty, to extend your point, I am guessing, it's an educated guess, that your recruiting rankings are typically more in the 45 to 55 range and not in the mid to low 70s, because you typically have a top 25 product on the field most years and have been able, again, as I said off the top, to outkick the coverage. But it's going to be difficult to compensate for what appears to be a class that's lacking some talent, at least on paper, with one 4-star recruit. Let's address him. Skylar Thompson, a quarterback, ranked 14th as the dual threat quarterback coming out of Missouri. Your thoughts about Skylar Thompson?
Skylar Thompson played at Fort Osage High School, which is not too far from where I live here in Lee's Summit, Missouri. I actually play basketball with a guy who knows some people at Fort Osage, and said they all rave about what a great kid he is and how hard he works and all of that. And you see the talent on the field. You know, he led Fort Osage to a state title in Missouri Class 5. And I think it was Gatorade Player of the Year in Missouri. So there's obvious talent there. Quarterback is very much a position of need for us, given the play that we had this year. Of course, injuries played into that. But, you know, with a team that relies on the quarterback run game like K-State, having depth at quarterback is a huge thing. And I think that with Jesse Ertz, Alex Delton, and now Skylar Thompson coming into the mix, I think we have a pretty good 3 deep there for the next 4 or 5 years, really. Well, I mean, Ertz won't be around that long, but with Delton and Thompson, you feel pretty confident about that position here in the next few years.
Thompson is the one kid that, according to ESPN, grades out as an 80, and then it proceeds from there. Your thoughts about some of the guys that are further down the list that, based on scouting reports, based on what you saw maybe in social media and saw possibly on tape, that you are kind of excited to see?
Yeah, one position that is a bit of a position of immediate need for K-State this year is wide receiver. It was a little bit difficult to parse out the quarterback versus wide receiver effects last year because we were playing Joe Hubner, who was a wide receiver in high school. He was playing quarterback for us, former walk-on. Not the kind of guy you expect to see the field for extended periods of time, but because of injuries and illness was forced out there. But the receivers also showed some inconsistency in route running, inconsistency catching the ball and things of that nature. So it's exciting to see a guy like Byron Pringle from Butler, junior college powerhouse here in Kansas. It'd be nice if he could come in and compete right away. We've got some young guys from the last recruiting class at wide receiver that we hope move in. So hopefully with Pringle and the emergence of some of those guys that are already on the roster, we'll be a lot better at wide receiver next year. The other immediate position of need is offensive line. We lose 4 of our 5 starters from the offensive line from last year, including Cody Whitehair, who's going to be probably a top 2 or 3 round draft pick in the NFL. We bring in a couple of junior college offensive linemen, Briante Matthews, and I lost the name of the other one here, but I'm going to find it real quick. Abdul Beecham. We bring in a couple of those guys. You've got Dalton Risner at center coming back. He was a redshirt freshman last year and started every game. And then our recruiting class last year included 4 freshman offensive linemen that should be starting to work their way into the 2 deep. So a lot of new faces on the offensive line. I think they were really looking to bring in a couple of JUCO guys to compete right away and give some of those younger guys a chance to develop. But those are really the big pieces right there. If you want to look on the other side of the ball, a name that I'm really excited about is Bronson Massey from East Texas. When he committed, the guys that I know down in Texas that cover high school football were pretty excited for him. They seem to think he's a pretty good kid, and they were pretty, in the way that they can be excited for K-State, they were pretty excited for us to pick up a player like that. I think he grades out as a 3-star player, but he's not going to be asked to contribute right away. We're set at defensive end for this year, and I think that in the next couple of years you're going to see him work his way in. We picked up a kid out of Bartlesville, Oklahoma, named AJ Parker late, who's a very, maybe even unrated recruit. He's a 2-star, I think. I think just the default. He got recruited by a Big 12 school. We'll just throw 2 stars by his name real quick because we haven't scouted him. But some of the guys like Alan Kenny, who I know who follow Oklahoma high school football a lot more closely than I do, we're pretty excited about that pickup for him. They seem to think that he flies a little bit under the radar in recruiting. So we'll see how that all turns out. Like I said, like you said, it's a little weak on star power, but the basis of K-State's program is built around development of 3-star players who begin to contribute as sophomores, juniors, seniors. Of course, you have to mix in that either that 4-star talent, or you have to unearth a diamond in the rough at a 2-star who turns out to be, your Jordy Nelson or a Terrence Newman or something like that. So we'll see what happens with it. There are some pieces there that you can be excited about.
Ty, on the national stage, people point to Wisconsin and Michigan State as being elite or near elite programs that recruit more in the typically 25 to 40 range, and they're able to coach up those players. But I think Kansas State is the classic example. They are the outlier of being able to stay in the conference championship hunt most years, play in elite bowl games most of the time or occasionally, and be able to recruit up from the status where they are. For the time that you've been following this, because I'm kind of intrigued by the performance on the field versus what we see in the recruiting rankings consistently out of Kansas State, has there been a time in which Bill Snyder and his staff went for the 5 stars, and those guys aren't standing on every corner, there's like 35 or 40, but more so gluts of 4 stars and just weren't successful? Or has this been the model for a long, long time?
There was one brief period of time, and it led to Bill Snyder's first retirement. I recall a story. When I was in Manhattan, I was in college when they won the Big 12 title in 2003. And I remember talking to a guy who was in a part of the program in in the fall of 2004, right before the season started, and he was really excited about the recruiting boost that we had gotten from winning the Big 12 title. He was talking about how we were getting in the door with players that we would never have had a chance to even talk to in the past. Well, that was great, but close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. So it doesn't matter if you get in the door and talk to these guys who are 4- and 5-star recruits. You got to actually land them. And if you expend the resources on guys where you finish second, you just expended resources on something that makes no difference. I suppose you could say optimistically, if they choose to transfer in a few years, then maybe that, you're their first choice, but that's a pretty, that's pretty hard to justify the use of resources like that. So we had a chance to go after some higher ranked players. We mostly didn't pan out on that. And we were left scrambling to fill spots late, and it showed in 2004 and 2005. Bill Snyder has talked about how they learned a lesson from that. And frankly, K-State has always focused on player development over recruiting. They're confident in their scouting, their ability to identify players who project as development projects, and then getting them on campus and then actually developing them in the weight room and on the field.
And it's a great point, Ty, because I think if you get past the elite programs in the country, this is the dilemma and the challenge and the decision that these type of programs have to make that are expected to compete for championships, get to postseason play on a regular basis, and don't have that type of high school talent right there in state. I'll liken it to Nebraska and some of the challenges that they face in the 21st century in regards to name brand and what's expected versus what they're able to deliver and what they have sitting in their backyard. Good stuff by Ty Berger from Bring on the Cats, breaking down the Kansas State class. Thanks a lot, Ty. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Mark.